Excellent. Hi, how's everyone doing? Good? Thank you so much for joining us out here at Mandalay Bay. I know it's at the end of the strip, and so it was a little bit of a hike, but glad you made it today. My name is Dave Ward. I lead capacity for EC2. So that means I cover services like auto scaling, spot, capacity blocks, as well as actually the capacity planning for EC2 itself. And I'm joined by Brian Felipe, who is the product manager for on-demand capacity reservations. Today we're going to go through a great agenda. It's jam-packed full of usage models. And so the question here is, how do you improve your capacity availability while using these, or improve your cost efficiency? And so we'll go through each and every one of them and provide you not only the best practices, but also share a little bit about what the team has been up to over the last year. So when we talk to customers, and I've been around AWS for a while now, the original conversations were just a lot of excitement about elasticity and being able to get capacity when you wanted it. But customers, as you dove in, really also care about keeping the price and the cost low. So that means that we ultimately have to follow or balance between cost and availability in order to be cost following. And that's the reason why we've introduced 4 different capacity models that we'll cover today. First is on demand, and this is the capacity model that everyone knows and loves and has seen for a while. You can pay for what you use down to the minute. You can spin instances up and down, all the rest. The second is on-demand capacity reservations, and this is for customers that care a little bit more about the assurance of having capacity when they need it. The trade-off, of course, because we're reserving your capacity and we want to be cost following, is that you're charged 24/7. The next model is really about capacity blocks. And capacity blocks provides you the ability to access machine learning compute. What you do is you specify a particular period of time, and then at the end of that time, we reclaim that capacity to give it to someone else. In some ways, the way we talk about it internally is as though we're democratizing access to generative AI capacity just because it's so much in demand. The final model is something that's near and dear to my heart because this is one of the ones that I used to work on way back when, and I get to work on it again, is spot. And this is where we sell excess EC2 capacity at a significant discount. The trade-off with this one is that you could potentially be interrupted at some point in time while using it so that we can give it to other capacity models like on-demand capacity reservations. Let's dive into on-demand itself. With on-demand, as I mentioned, it is about having that flexibility to spin up and down capacity when you use it. We have over 850 different instance types, which allow you to have that selection of capacity, as well as we have many geographies that you can access, including 108 different availability zones, think of that as data centers, as well as 34 different regions, and those basically allow you to have different geographies across the globe. One of the, I guess in the past couple of years, we released local zones. If you're not familiar, this is really about having a geographical presence within certain metro areas. And so this allows you to access things all the way to Hawaii, which would be kind of a nice place to be right now. So with that said, we have 14 more coming online, especially if you have types of compute like in Hollywood, we have a great data center there if you're doing rendering. It's really meant for specific purposes. And so you will see a little bit difference in terms of instance selection as you look at each of those zones, because they're tailored towards the use cases and the areas that will typically use them. With on-demand, as you expect, this is really about different use cases like cyclical usage. During the day, you're going to scale up and down based on different usage periods like 9 to 5. You may have short-term workloads, as well as just normal steady state. This is kind of the de facto and default way customers tend to use capacity. Now, one of the most fundamental core benefits to on-demand is the elasticity. And we work really hard behind the scenes to make it look or provide that illusion of infinite capacity. We do that by really focusing hard on capacity planning, thinking ahead to each and every type of capacity pool behind the scenes to say how much capacity is required there. And then we do other things too, like optimize when we're actually placing instances, when you call run instances. We do things like rebuild hardware as we notice demand is shifting between instance types and different types of instance families. We shape our internal demand as well. And so this is, as we see one instance type as particularly popular, we may actually tell some of our internal workloads to move off. And then finally, we actually have a very strong focus on utilization. And you may say, oh, that's just about trying to keep the costs low, which, yes, that's true. We want to make sure we provide you the most cost-effective solution. But it's also about making sure that every piece of hardware we land that we possibly can, we're putting into your hands. And so there's a lot of benefits with that. One note, I should it's an aside a little bit, but there are physics associated with landing capacity. So as we're landing new generations, one of the questions I often get is, how come I don't have infinite capacity day one for new generations? And the reality is there's throughput that needs to get into the data center as we're landing. And so that will ramp up. Our goal, of course, is to have those broad and deep pools for our latest generations. And we're really focused on that over the next year or two. Now, while we work significantly hard to provide this illusion of infinite capacity, the reality is that on-demand is built on a shared capacity pool. And that means that if there's other customers that want that capacity too, they may be able to actually claim it. So often when I'm talking with customers, one of the questions they have is, how do I make sure that I increase that capacity availability so that I can have capacity when I need it? In fact, I was getting a question about this just before the presentation. And really, it comes down to having flexibility. And flexibility is one of those things that we have a lot of capacity that's available today. And if you have the ability to be flexible, all new doors open up. The analogy, as I was trying to go back and forth with Brian before this, was sort of like being at a Las Vegas buffet. And so if you really want the crab legs, and everyone's going for the crab legs, you may run out. But on the other hand, if you can do spaghetti or steak or something else like that, it's much more likely that you're going to have something to eat that you really will enjoy. I just think he was hungry, but I thought it also might apply to our situation here too. Now, there's 4 different dimensions that we typically talk about when we're thinking about flexibility. The first is really about instance family. And so this is your C's and your M's and your R's that have different properties with them, but sometimes they're close enough that you may be able to substitute one for the other. Another is instance size, and so sometimes you may be able to scale up your workloads. Generation is actually one of the bigger levers, and so being able to go from 7th generation down to 6th generation if that might not be available. And then finally, I think Peter had a slide that showed something around 50%, don't quote me on the specific number, go back and look at the presentation, but around 50% of what we're landing in data centers right now is graviton. And so if you have flexibility across different chip architectures, there's a lot of opportunity to get additional capacity. So often when we're talking through this, customers are like, great, you have new capacity coming out, 7th generation, 8th generation, whatever. I have to go in and do deep qualification of those instances before we use them. And we spend a lot of time actually going through what are you doing for instance qualification, going through all the specifics of what's happening behind the scenes. And often we find that many of those customers aren't actually getting any benefit from those qualifications themselves. And so I think it's worth just reminding everyone to really dig deep and look at those to see whether or not there's benefit. From my experience, I've been at AWS now for about 17 years. And over that time, there's only one use case of all the servers and all the fleets that I've run where there was an issue or where there was something different on the generations. And the only time we actually found it is when we were running at scale and there was some interesting side effect. And so again, it's worth looking at your assumptions around qualifications. I say that because we actually have tools that are built to really help you build in flexibility into your applications. Because as you start to analyze, what do I need to do to be flexible, you start to say, I need to know how large your capacity pools are. I need to know where to target. I need to know a bunch of different things. And so we've built 2 different primitives that really help you. The first is called EC2 Fleet. This is really targeted at making it so that if you're doing like a run instance call, launching a net new instance, how do you tell us about the flexibility that you actually have with your demand? And the second is auto-scaling. Auto-scaling's been around, I want to say, 15, 16 years at this point. And as a part of that, it will automatically scale up or scale down based on different metrics that you tell it to scale on. When you're trying to leverage auto-scaling and Fleet, it's pretty simple. There's 3 simple steps. The first is just setting up the auto-scaling group or the Fleet. The second is defining flexibility, and I'll explain that in a second. And then finally, auto-scaling will automatically launch or not, or you use Fleet when you're using, instead of your normal run instance call. And so fairly easy to set up. When we talk about defining flexibility, it's important to know that this actually provides us additional information as well. So when we're going through and planning out how much we need to have of different instance types, we look at what the actual usage is. And while we may apply some assumptions and to say this might be more flexible, the more information we have around Fleet and otherwise helps us to know, hey, they want the latest generation, or they want this particular thing. And that helps us to understand what we can do to deepen the regular on-demand pools, but it's also useful to make sure you have the higher capacity availability to use them as well. So there's two different models. The first is attribute-based instance selection. This allows you to specify, I want a certain number of vCPUs, a certain amount of memory, EBS backed or not, as well as something we launched in the last 2 weeks called performance protection. This allows you to say a minimum generation, which for many people that may have looked at this in the past, this actually opens up a lot of the doors because many people can't use an M1 instance from 18 years ago. And so there's a minimum generation that they actually have to have. The other option is to specify very specific instances that they can leverage. And with this, the reason why I talked about qualification is I often find customers start in that quadrant of manual selection, and they can move over to that attribute-based instance selection instead. It just makes things move a lot easier. And for one customer in particular, I was impressed to hear that as we were just launching a brand new instance type, we already had traffic on it. And we were like, why did that happen? And it's because they were using attribute-based instance selection. It's a mouthful, so I'll call it AWS from now on. So you can absolutely get that benefit. Now, just specifying CPU and memory isn't sufficient. We have to know how to prioritize what to launch. So there's two different ways that you can tell us. The first is cost-based, and so we'll try to launch the most cost-effective solution for you. The other is availability-based, and so this really focuses on launching into a place that will have more capacity available for you. So if you have other things that also go along with this application, it's a good way of setting those applications up for success as well. Now, just as a quick example, you can specify vCPUs and memory and EBS only. And what it will do is, again, select multiple instances, more than you may have anticipated, to get you to the launch that you're looking for. And ultimately, again, we're really focusing on trying to get you to a higher availability by having some of that flexibility. I say that, just one quick reminder, we're of course going to continue to focus on having what you want, but this just gives you that extra level of certainty. With that said, we have one next model, the on-demand capacity reservations, which is that next level of capacity assurance. And Brian's here to talk about that.
Thanks, Dave. Hey everyone, like Dave said, my name is Brian. Product manager here at EC2. I've been with Amazon for just over seven years, so not the 17 years that Dave has, but I've been in capacity the entire time. I actually started my career planning, the event that we just had 2 days ago, Cyber Monday, planning Cyber Monday, planning Prime Day, making sure that we had enough capacity for those events. So capacity is near and dear to my heart, and now I'm the product manager for on-demand capacity reservations. And going back to Dave's analogy, on-demand capacity reservations, if we're talking about balance, this really balances towards the availability. But before I get there, because this is, Dave's been around 17 years, he actually helped launch the first tool that we've ever had to help our customers get capacity assurance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about zonal reserved instances, just so you can see how we have innovated over the years to help you get more capacity assurance for your workloads. Because when you have a critical workload, and it's a critical workload that has to run, then you want to have that capacity assurance. So when we launched zonal RIs, or I'll just call them ZRIs for short, when we launched ZRIs back in 2009, really two different products squished into one. On one side, you had the capacity reservation. This is the thing that set aside the capacity so that no one else can touch it, so that only you could run it. And then on the other side, you had the billing discount. This is where you commit to a 1 or 3 year term. You get a discount on all your usage for that reservation. But we found as we were running this with customers that meshing those two things together made them very hard and difficult to manage. For example, the engineering teams, they loved that they could have the capacity reservation, and that's all they cared about is my capacity going to run? Is it there? Now the finance team, on the other hand, they cared about the discount. Am I getting my discount? How do I manage my discount? And so what we did is that we broke them apart. And I'm going to have a really cool animation. This animation was made from Dave, and he's really proud of it. So just so you know, if you want to give him a round of applause or anything for the animation, he'd love it. So we broke them apart. And on one side, thank you for indulging me. I really appreciate it. On one side, we had on-demand capacity reservations. And then on the other side, we had savings plans. So I'm going to dive a little bit into savings plan. This is an aside before we get into on-demand capacity reservations. But savings plans are really cool. In effect, what they are is they're a commitment to spend a certain amount of money per hour. You get to choose how much money you're spending, but you spend a certain amount of money per hour. And in return, you get a discount on your usage. Now, because we broke these apart, we were able to actually make 2 different flavors of savings plans to give you so much more flexibility. So, for example, we have a compute savings plan and an instance savings plan. The compute savings plan will give you a discount on any of your EC2 usage. Now, it doesn't have to be a specific instance type or a specific availability zone. Any EC2 usage across the globe. So it gives you a ton of flexibility and up to 66% off of your usage. And then on the flip side, if you want to give up a little bit of that flexibility for a deeper discount, we have the instance savings plan. And the instance savings plan is basically confined to a region and an instance family. But within that region and instance family, you can mix and match the sizes or even the availability zones that you run into. So when we combine this with on-demand capacity reservations, we get a really powerful tool. So let me talk a little bit about capacity reservations. I would say capacity reservations are the highest, or provide the best availability out of any product that EC2 offers. Now, Dave mentioned how on-demand, we do a lot behind the scenes to make sure that we have elasticity within our on-demand pools. And you can even take that higher by being flexible. But with capacity reservations, we're actually taking the capacity and setting it aside for you so that no one else can touch it, no one else can launch into it to give you capacity assurance. Now, kind of the downside or the flip side of that would be because we're setting it aside for you, you pay for it the entire time you're holding the reservation because we can't sell it to anybody else. But let's kind of like combine this back together and see why this is such a powerful tool. So imagine now you have a savings plan or a compute savings plan, and you're running on maybe the latest or one of the latest Graviton instances, C7G. And then Amazon comes along and does what Amazon does and innovates and launches a new instance, C8G. So instead of having to wait till your 1 or 3 year term is over, now with a capacity reservation, you can actually cancel those whenever you want. There's no commitment to it. So you cancel the capacity reservation for the C7G, create a new capacity reservation for the C8G, and everything just works. You just get the discount, and you can upgrade. You can even have the savings plan follow the sun if you want, if you don't want to use a capacity reservation. So really, really powerful tool. So how do you use ODCRs? I would say the ODCR kind of an instance, they work on this concept called matching. So there's 5 different parameters that the instance and the ODCR have to have in common in order for the instance to run in the ODCR. The first 4 are kind of inherent to the capacity itself. So that's the instance type, the availability zone, where the capacity is located, the platform or the operating system, and whether or not it's a shared or dedicated instance type. Now, the 5th thing is what we call instance eligibility. And this is more of a parameter that you can set both within the reservation and with the instance to make sure that the two match. So let's jump a little bit into that. In terms of instance eligibility, there's two types of instance eligibility. On one side, we have open instance eligibility. And I liken this to almost like a public pool, where any launch where it has the other 4 parameters matching, any launch will just automatically run in your capacity reservation. It just kind of works like magic. And I would probably say 70% or so of our customers use this open because it's easy to use and it works. Now for the other 30%, they use what's called a targeted instance eligibility. And this is where if you want to create a private pool within your account so that no one else can touch it. And then make it so if you have multiple workloads running in a single account, you can set this capacity aside so only your highly critical workload gets the capacity. So the way to do that is through reservation targeting. And I would say there's 2 different ways to target reservation. One is definitely a preferred way over the other, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the 2 different ways are, one is just through target by reservation ID. This is when you're launching your instance, you specify the reservation ID, and then if the capacity reservation has capacity in it, the instance will launch. If the capacity reservation doesn't have capacity in it, the instance won't launch. It'll ice. It won't go into on-demand. The other side is targeting by resource group ID. Works the same way, except you're targeting a resource group. And then you can move things in and out of the resource group. Gives you a lot more flexibility. So if we compare and contrast these, I would say the targeting by reservation ID works well at small scale. If you want to just do a couple of instances, it works really well. It's just really easy. Click, boom, you're done. But if you want to do something at scale, then you're probably going to want to use the target by reservation group because you can move things in and out. If there's capacity that runs out, it'll automatically fall back to running in on demand. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. Now, Dave talked a lot about ABIS, or attribute-based instance selection. And I wanted to talk a little bit here about how that works with capacity reservations, because this is such a powerful tool that the auto-scaling group can choose the instance for you in order to either get the best price performance, or there's a couple different things that you can choose on. But how does that work with an ODCR? And I'm pleased to announce that just last week, we launched a new capability called ASG Capacity Reservation Preference. So with this, you can actually run the capacity in your ASG, use ABIS to select your instance, and now with this preference, you can actually have those instances run directly in your ODCRs. So the way that it works, there's 2 different preferences you can have. One is to say capacity reservations only, and that basically means the ASG will go and try to find instances to launch in your reservations, and if it can find instances, it will launch it. If it cannot find instances in a reservation, it won't launch anything. And then the other thing is capacity reservations first, and essentially here, if you try to launch an instance, it will first try to launch into the capacity reservation, but if there's no capacity available, then it will go and try to launch into on-demand. And what this really gives you is higher efficiency within your capacity reservations, because now ABIS is not just selecting just any instance that might work for you or like the lowest cost instance. It's selecting instances that are in your capacity reservation so that you don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot to use my capacity reservation. I have this unused capacity sitting around. ABIS will automatically find that capacity for you and launch instances into it. So I'd say the final core feature of ODCRs is this idea around capacity reservation sharing. And with capacity reservation sharing, you can actually take your capacity reservation, share it across your organization or to any other account through what we call AWS Resource Access Manager, or RAM. By default, when I share a capacity reservation, so if I were to share a capacity reservation over with Dave, if Dave uses the capacity reservation, he's going to pay for any usage that he has. If he doesn't use it and no one else uses it, then I'm the one that's going to be paying for it as the owner of the reservation. So we have this core thing called capacity reservations, or on-demand capacity reservations. We're not done innovating. We talked about how with zonal RIs, we continue to get feedback from our customers that we want, that they wanted more control and flexibility. That's still something that customers are asking for, that they want more centralized control now to manage their capacity at scale. And so we found that customers want control in how they, their reservation management. They want control over their billing. They want control over how they view their metrics and their dashboards. So I'm pleased to announce that just last week, or a couple weeks ago, excuse me, you can now right-size your ODCRs. You can split your ODCRs. You can move capacity between ODCRs. You can even modify the ODCR so that it can go between open and targeted. This is a huge advancement to helping our customers manage their ODCRs more easily and effectively. And we'll talk about why this is important in just a second. The other thing that customers want is the billing flexibility. So now, as of a couple weeks ago, we just launched the ability to assign that billing to another account. So if I were to share my ODCR with Dave, I can now assign that ODCR billing to him, and if he doesn't use it, he's the one that has to pay for it. He has to accept the third step is accepting. I can't just go and throw my unused ODCRs onto him and have him not accept it. So there is that acceptance part. So how do we bring this all together, and why is this such an important advancement? One is we're finding with our larger customers that they are moving towards this model of a centralized capacity management. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it gives them a lot more visibility to have all of their capacity in one place. Two, it gives them a lot more control over if there's unused capacity, they can make quick actions to reduce that capacity or to cancel the capacity reservations. And three, it gives them more control to determine who or which of the accounts are actually getting the capacity. If they have an emergency in one account, they can quickly move that capacity from one account to another. However, before these launches, there was a little bit of an issue with that. Say I have an ODCR of size 100. If I share it with all of these accounts, then each of those accounts has full access to the ODCR, which is a problem if one of the accounts acts negatively or they spin up too much. So now with Split, you can split all your ODCRs up and share them to each individual team or service. And this makes it a lot easier for those centralized accounts to control who's getting the capacity where and when. Now, let's pretend that Dave is account number 2 here, and Dave asked me as a centralized capacity manager to get an ODCR for him. So I get that ODCR A for him, but Dave doesn't really have an incentive to use the capacity reservation efficiently. It's kind of on me as the centralized capacity manager to pay for it if he doesn't use it. And so either I have to pay for it or doesn't use it, peanut butter spread that cost across everybody, or do some magic in the back end with accounting to reallocate that cost back to him. Now with the ability to assign billing ownership, now I could just say, Dave, you asked for this capacity. I'm the central account. I want to be the one to manage it, but you have to pay for it if you don't use it. Now we're aligning our incentives so that Dave is the one that has to make sure that he's using the capacity efficiently. And finally, we have a couple other launches that just happened where we're now giving you more control to see and to aggregate your capacity reservation metrics in CloudWatch. So now instead of looking at individual ODCRs, you can aggregate across instance type, availability zone, even all of your ODCRs together. And you can get a global view of your ODCRs. So within EC2, there's something called the EC2 global view. And we just launched the ability to see your ODCRs there. And what that allows you to do is now you don't have to go and look at every other endpoint and go across each region. You can see all your ODCRs in one place and everything and make decisions much quicker. But that's not all what customers have been asking us to improve upon. One thing, like I said, I started out, I was working on capacity planning. And capacity planning for Amazon.com and making sure that Prime Day and Cyber Monday went off without a hitch. Capacity planning is hard. And it's a problem that our customers have been asking us to solve. So why is it so hard, though? There's a conundrum that our customers have to face when planning for future events. It's A, do I plan early and provision my capacity early and be prepared for my event, but I pay for that capacity by provisioning early? Or B, wait until the last minute to provision my capacity and may not get the exact capacity that I want. There's still going to be capacity there. You just might not get the exact capacity you want. Well, now I'm pleased to announce that just last week, we launched future dated ODCRs. And with future dated ODCRs, you can now reserve your capacity reservations up to 120 days in advance and have the confidence and know that EC2 is going to deliver the capacity on the start date, and you'll have it to run your events. So how do future dated ODCRs work? It's just like a regular ODCR, except after you configure it, you add a start date, and there is a little bit of a commitment. There's like about a 2-week commitment to use the capacity after we deliver it. But once you configure it, you watch the status, make sure it's accepted. Once it's accepted, you know that EC2 is going to deliver, and then you just wait for the capacity to show up on your start date, and then as soon as it does, you launch instances. It's easy as that. So with that, I'm really excited to talk to you all about these launches. With that, I'll throw it back to Dave to talk about another capacity product called Capacity Blocks.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. So how many people use machine learning today? Okay. Normally you have that joke of, we haven't talked about machine learning in the last 5 seconds, so let's start doing it today. So capacity blocks are one of the primary ways of consuming machine learning instances. And again, when I started talking about it, it was really about how do we democratize access to generative AI capacity. One of the challenges that we were seeing is just because these are so popular, it's sort of like getting an Xbox X, when it first came out. I'm a gamer, so at least I play games with my kids, so that's my excuse. But when you're trying to get one of those systems, you had to like refresh on the web and wait and try to get it. Sometimes generative AI capacity has been like that as we've gone through. And so the question is, how do we democratize? How do we get that in everyone's hands? And so that's why we built capacity blocks. So now you only provision for the time that you actually need it. And part of the reason why we identified this is internal to Amazon, as a bunch of teams were using generative AI, they would actually be sitting on capacity and it was sitting idle. And so we would go around and look at CPU utilization and everything else. And so this is a really helpful thing, so you're not overpaying for that capacity as well. Now, the kind of gotcha with it is that at the very end of that time period, we reclaim that capacity. So this is a really great model because it allows you to experiment and test and provision it, get your hands on it, and try to start using it. It's great for training because training typically is a time period, let's call it 1 to 3 months typically. And then the last thing is it's reserved capacity as well. During that period, it's yours. You can do anything you want with it. So if you're about to launch, you can actually provision more that you would potentially need. When you're actually setting these up, in case you haven't done it, many people hadn't in the audience, there are multiple instance types that we support. So P5, P4D, TRN1, you can provision them in powers of 2. And part of this is because of the way that you use machine learning, they tend to be needed in powers of 2. And so that's how we've designed it. Up until recently, it was 1 day up until 1 month that you could reserve it. And lastly, you could do it across multiple different OSs. Within the last 2 weeks, we actually released a number of features. And the intent behind these is to make this far closer to an on-demand experience, but all the positives that we get with capacity blocks itself. So the first thing that we heard from customers is that they would have a training workload and they estimated it to be a certain amount of time, but it really was going to take longer. And so we introduced the ability to extend the capacity block itself, assuming there's the capacity available. And then the second thing was that customers said, 1 month is not sufficient for my training runs. And so we enabled it so you can increase up to 6 months associated with any capacity block. So if you're going along, you're using capacity, you already have used 2 weeks out of your 1 month capacity block, you can actually further extend it so it's a 6 month period for that whole time. The next is that not only machine learning capacity, but capacity blocks weren't available in every location. So we've expanded to Ohio as well as Tokyo. And the last piece is really about how quickly you can get capacity blocks. It used to be so that we wouldn't have more fragmentation, that we would wait up to a day before providing the capacity. Now it's within minutes. And so again, it's far closer to that on-demand experience than what you may have noticed over the past year. Cool. One of the things, if you watched either Matt's or Peter's keynotes, you may have heard a little bit about Trainium 2 or Ultra servers. These servers are up to 83.2 FP8 petaflops. They are amazing for both inference as well as for training. And they're one of those plays that AWS is continuing to innovate by building its own silicon associated with machine learning. You can imagine that over time, we're going to continue to optimize and work with our partners to really have an incredible set of offerings built on top of this. And with that said, it goes without saying, but we have capacity blocks associated with TRN2 as well. Now, training is one of the primary workloads associated with capacity blocks. And so one of the ways that you do training is with SageMaker. So I got the ability to announce this ahead of time, but we are just about to announce in maybe about an hour, SageMaker. What's that? An hour ago. Okay, so it's gone. Good. So training plans associated with SageMaker. The idea is we want to make it very easy to set up training workloads and reserve the capacity you need just as you're establishing those plans. And so you're able to specify exactly how much capacity you need. You're able to understand how much you're going to pay for that training workload itself. And then you can set up the rest of kind of the configuration associated with your SageMaker jobs, all in one seamless integrated workflow. There's multiple benefits, but they largely break down into two main areas. The first is the capacity block side of it. So it's predictable access to the compute that you have. You get access to the types of training clusters that you need. You know your costs up front. But the second piece is really that deep integration with SageMaker. It takes a lot of work to try to coordinate and line up everything that you need, including all the data and compute in the right location, having all the right parameters. And so by aligning these two, you make sure that you have the capacity you need associated with the jobs and everything all in a single location. And so our hope is that this actually makes it far easier to do any of the training that you're trying to complete. All right, so a lot of innovation in capacity blocks. I imagine this is an area we're going to continue to focus on over the next year. And so stay tuned to a bunch of other things that we'll continue to work on. EC2 Spot is the next area we should talk about. And as I mentioned in the beginning, and Brian loves this icon, this is about spare capacity. He was like, why do you have a tire on your screen? So spare capacity. Spare capacity basically allows you to get a substantial discount, up to 90%, off the on-demand price. And the trade-off is that your capacity can be reclaimed after a notification. And just to zoom in, if you haven't been paying attention to the spot price, there's actually been a big drop in the spot price over the past year. And so we've been working to figure out how we can continue to reduce those prices, making it even more interesting to leverage spot. There are several workloads that are great patterns to use with Spot. Not everything works on Spot. At one point, many, many years ago, I was actually talking to a customer, and they were using Spot for a production database. Do not do that. Spot can go away, and you can lose that data if you haven't set it up right and otherwise. So do not do that. But if you have workloads like this, asynchronous, interruptible workloads, so let's say you have a batch job that you're trying to complete that can be paused and resumed at a later time, this is a great thing to use. Second is scale-out type workloads. So if traditionally you were just running one instance for, I don't know, 5 years, if instead it's massively parallelizable, where you can actually take all of that capacity and try to run it in a much shorter period of time, you can use all of our excess capacity to leverage that. And so one great use case where I've heard of is we had a customer that was doing drug research for cancer. And it used to be that it took them about 5 years to complete the research. They had a very small number of instances, and it would cost them millions of dollars just to set that up on their on-prem. And then what they did is with Spot, they burst into all of our excess unused capacity, getting those significant savings, but at the same time, they went from 5 years down to about 2 days. And in doing so, it wasn't just one drug compound they found, it was multiple. And so this type of technology can significantly accelerate what the work is that you're doing if you can find the right use cases. The last is something I call time-shiftable workloads. And so if there's one thing that you take away from this conversation around Spot, it's really this, in that this is our excess capacity. And like many of you, we have a lot of workloads that run 9 to 5. Well, that turns out that between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m., we have more capacity. So that means two different things when using Spot. The first is that we have 1/5 the level of interruption during that off-peak hour. And the second is that you'll see even more savings, up to 10, 20%, depending on the pool, during those off-peak hours. And so if you have time-shiftable workloads, meaning you have to be in that region or locality, that's great as long as you can run it in the evening. So sometimes people run batch workloads in the evening. Sometimes they can delay things so that they can just do it then. The other is this is based on local time. And so if you have the ability, you're running in the US, and you can run in Tokyo, as an example, there's a time period where you can take advantage of this if you are not focused on geographical stickiness, so to speak. And so there's a lot of opportunity here. I started working on Spot a long time ago, and it's amazing to see how much it's grown, but this is one of those areas I think is ripe full of, for innovation, and really a great opportunity for you all to take advantage of it as well. Now, in terms of architecting for Spot, there's a lot of things that we've developed over the years to make architecting for Spot much easier. The first is that we notify you before we interrupt it. And so if there are workflows or jobs or scripts that you need to run before that, you can do that. The second, and a very common thing, is checkpointing to make sure that you have a certain set of data, you know where you need to resume once it comes in. Stateless applications also work really well. In the very beginning when we had Spot, it was about, we forced a termination of that instance, and so stateless applications were most of what everyone ran. But then we introduced this thing called interruption behavior, and it allowed you to stop or hibernate your instance instead, which allowed you basically to keep everything that was on that local disk. And then hibernate, of course, allows you to do more with memory. So depending on where you're at with that, this allows you to take advantage of it far more easily than originally, I guess. Now, when using Spot, it's great to architect for it, but you never know if you're ready for it unless you test it. And that's why Fault Injection Service, FIS, allows you to actually test the Spot interruptions to see whether or not your architecture is gonna work well. When using Spot, again, a lot of the use cases focus around making sure that you can burst into our unused capacity. And so flexibility, all of that flexibility we talked about in the beginning, matters a lot, because the more you can use across all the different pools, the more you can burst and the faster you can move. And so we provide something called Spot placement scores. This basically says, here are the different, here's how much capacity we have in each of the pools. It's a relative metric as opposed to an absolute metric, but it gives you an idea of where you could launch. Second, you can use ABIS again, and then last, you can specify here are the instances that you can launch with. So with ABIS, you can use Fleet. Fleet works with Spot. It was actually originally intended for Spot, and then we realized it works actually very generally as well. All right, so we covered a lot of ground today. I think the key takeaways that I would love for you to take from this presentation: first, there's a lot of different usage models. These are areas where we continue to innovate so that we can balance the trade-offs between availability and cost. It's one of those areas where we'll continue to work with you all, and so, as we have customer meetings with you, getting that feedback, this is one of the ways we iterate on which ones we provide. So we started with reserved instances, we moved to on-demand, capacity reservations, and savings plans. There's a lot of innovation we continue to do in this space because we want to give you the levers and the primitives to be successful as you're managing the capacity. The second piece is really focusing on those levers. Please make sure that you're using savings plans and looking at how you can tune the flexibility for your workloads. There's other things like Cost Optimizer and whatnot that work with this as well to make sure that you are using the capacity you have most effectively. And then lastly, it's really about we are continuing to innovate on the capacity management tools that we provide. And this is an area where we're going to continue to focus over the next year. And so stay tuned for all those things. But as you look at future capacity reservations and really understanding some of those investments in capacity blocks and otherwise, we really want to make sure that we make that very simple to do so that managing all of this isn't complicated, it isn't heavy lifting. It's really easy to get in there and do the things you need. Okay, if this was interesting, there's another session tomorrow at 2 that goes into on-demand capacity reservations. And with that said, thank you so much for joining us today. Brian and I will be up in front if you have any questions. Please take the survey. This is something that we take really seriously, taking that feedback to figure out how we can make these presentations more effective for you. Thank you for coming, and have a great day. Great rest of reInvent.